In this video, we'll try to understand what exactly is the concept of lazy loading. Now, lazy loading, you can think about it's a design pattern or it's a concept where we delay the loading of the objects until the point where we need it. Or I'll say in other words, on-demand object loading rather than loading the objects unnecessarily.
Now to demonstrate lazy loading, what I've done is I've created a very simple class here called as a customer class, and this customer class has lots of order objects. And if you watch the constructor of the customer class, in the constructor of the customer class I'm loading both the customer data as well as the order data. In other words, as soon as you create the customer object, the customer data will be loaded as well as the order object data will be loaded. So you can see that I have a very simple console application over here, and this console application I have created the customer class. So at this point, that means at this point here, both the customer plus the order object data will be loaded, right? So if I run this application very quickly, so when you run the application and if you see the add watch window, you can see that the customer data is loaded as well as the composed order objects are loaded. So you can see that after this line I have put a debug point here, so the application is currently waiting here. But as soon as the customer object is loaded, both the customer data as well as the composed objects, that is order objects, is also loaded. Now this is fine, but think about that if the composed objects are huge in numbers, if they are heavy, for example, you have orders, then you have phones, right? Then you have addresses and etc. So what you would like to do is you would like to delay this composed object loading. In other words, for example, if you see here, at this moment you probably would like to just load the customer data, right? But as soon as the for each loop starts, that means on demand basis, you'd like to go and load the order objects. This is termed as lazy loading. So as the application demands, the class loads its composed objects. So how do we achieve this? So the first thing what we need to do is, in order to achieve lazy loading, is we need to go and remove this code which actually loads the order objects in the constructor, right? So we need to go and remove this code from here, and then when the get is done on the order collection, right, at that moment what I'll do is I will go and make a check here. So I'm going to say here if underscore orders is equal to null. So in other words, if it is null, then only load the orders object. So what will happen here is, when anyone does a get on the order collection, at that time only the order object will be loaded and not during the construction of the object itself, right? So now if I go and run the application, so if I go and now do a F5 here, you can now see that the order collection is null and the customer data is loaded, right? But as soon as I start the for each loop, so when I start the for each loop, there is a get done on the order collection over here. At this moment, you can see we do a get, right? So as soon as the first get is done on the orders collection, this object will be loaded. So if you watch here, till these two statements, we never needed the order collection, right? So you can see that the order collection is null and that is good. But as soon as there is a demand of the orders collection, so as soon as there is a get done, so I will just go and move this debug point ahead. I'll do a F10 here. So as soon as I do a F10, you can see now the count is 2. So at this moment now he has loaded the orders collection. So when the for each loop starts, the order collection is loaded. So this is one way of implementing lazy loading by doing a check here. Okay, so wherever the object demand is needed, just before that you do a check and you do the loading of the object. Now this is nice. So the code is working, the logic is working. But think about a situation, where your customer class has lots of order objects, it has a lot of addresses objects, it had a lot of phones object. And if you put this if check all over your class, right, your class will become very complicated, right? So you'd love to see some ready-made functionality which you can get from .NET framework so that you can minimize this complexity of lazy loading, right? And the good news is that we have a very nice class provided by .NET framework called as the lazy class. It's a generic class, lazy, and by using the lazy class you can implement lazy loading and you can minimize the complexity of your class. So to implement lazy loading, the first thing is you need to go and define this complete object, that is the list of order which you want to load lazily, by saying lazy of the list of order, right? And the next thing is we don't need this if condition now anymore, so you don't need to write a scattered code across your class of these if conditions. And when the data is loaded inside this lazy object, right, the actual data is loaded inside value, the value property. So you have to say orders.value. So this will actually give you the collection of list of order. Okay. Now the next thing, what this lazy order object needs to know is from where he will get the orders data, right? So we need to go and we need to tell him here that you will get this data from, you will get this list of order data from this function, that is load orders, right? So if you see this lazy class here, you can see in this lazy class I can go and I can pass a function here. So I'll say here, yes, you will get this data from this function. So load orders. The variable name is underscore orders, so it is underscore orders, right? So you can see now the next thing in the constructor initialization itself, I'm telling that you will get the data from this load orders function. So two things you need to do when you want to use the lazy class. The first thing is go and define the lazy generic object for the object which you want to lazy load, and second, define from where he will get the data from. Okay, now what will happen is when any call is made to this orders object, right, anytime at any moment of the place he will actually go and make a call to the load orders. Okay, so till then this orders object will not be loaded. So if I now go and run my code here, so if I go and run my code here, you can see, if you watch very closely, you can see that this underscore orders here, it's saying that is value created is false. This is value created property actually belongs to the lazy class, so he's saying that the value is not created, and if you go and see, the value is actually null, right? But as soon as I go and start looping the for each loop, so as soon as I make a call to the for the orders object, you can see the value is still null here. But as soon as I do a F10 here, you can see now the count is 2, right? So this is an automatic way of implementing lazy loading by using the ready-made function, or I'll say the ready-made generic class, the lazy class. Now there are advantages and disadvantages of everything what we do in programming, right? So in the same way, lazy loading has its own advantages and has its own disadvantages. So first thing is, don't take it as a writing on the stone saying that implementing lazy loading always is a good practice. Okay, but said and done, yes, lazy loading does have decent advantages, like first thing, it minimizes the startup time of your application. Application consumes less memory. Why? Because now the objects are loaded on demand basis rather than just loading the objects at the start itself, and unnecessarily executing SQL statements are avoided because the objects are loaded on demand. Now the disadvantage is that the code becomes complicated because we need to do a lot of checks, if the loading has to be done, it has to be done or not, right? So with every call, the check is done. So there can be a slight decrease in performance. So you should use lazy loading when then, the lazy loading should be used, when you think that your compose objects are heavy. So for example, let's say that you have a customer object, and if you have just 4 or 5 order objects, it does not matter, right? But let's say that you have thousands of order objects, then yes, lazy loading is good. Why? Because loading all those 1,000 objects in one go in the memory, will not be a good idea, right? So on demand basis, that would be a good idea rather than loading the objects, unnecessarily. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. In this video, we were trying to understand what is lazy loading. We also saw that, how we can use the lazy generic class given by .NET Framework to automate lazy loading. And second, we talked about the advantages and disadvantages of lazy loading. Thank you so much.